I think I came in, when I look back over the initial communications around the water crisis, one of the things I wish I could have taken back, had a do-over around was
Welcome back to another episode of the Randy Wilson Podcast. I'm your host, Randy Wilson, and today we are very excited to be sitting here with Mayor Danny Avula, Mayor Dr. Danny Avula. So all the credentials there, sir, now. We are actually at City Hall, and we are excited to be able to sit down and talk to him here somewhere between 30 and 40 days in office as the new mayor of the city, the 81st mayor of the city. Remember, this podcast can be played everywhere podcasts are played, but I'm going to encourage you, if you're listening on one of the audio channels, go over to YouTube and check us out, because you can see this very well-dressed, distinguished man with this fresh new haircut today. We want to make sure we show off our mayor. We're very proud of him. Since taking office, Richmond's 81st mayor, Dr. Danny Avula has addressed several significant challenges and initiated key priorities for our city. Notably, he managed a major water crisis caused by power failure at the city's water plant during the winter storm, which led to a boil water advisory affecting over 200,000 residents. Mayor Avula emphasized the need for a thorough investigation to prevent future occurrences. Additionally, Richmond has faced a housing crisis with home prices nearly doubling in 4 years. Mayor Avula's plan to address this includes tax incentives, eviction prevention, and expanding affordable housing. He has called upon businesses to contribute to these efforts, acknowledging the challenges ahead. Just a little glimpse of the things that we're going to tap in today. But I think where I first want to start, Mayor, is you're the first mayor that has had the experience of actually coming into office with a transition plan. Talk to us about what that's been like, kind of your initial experiences. Has it been what you thought it was going to be? Has it been, you've handled it with grace, first and foremost. You've handled it very well, but I'm sure it's not. I don't know if it's nothing's probably happening the way that you may have expected to happen. So, right. What's that transition been like?
Yeah, the day after the election, pulled together our transition team, at least the core group that was going to drive, and spent the bulk of November 7th to January 1st really tapping expertise from across the city and across the region, and really trying to get crystallized around what is our game plan going to be for affordable housing? How are we going to address gun violence? What are we going to do for LGBTQ rights? Right. So it was a really thoughtful and well organized process led by Dr. Thad Williamson, who is a professor at University of Richmond, but has a long history here in the city. Actually was the founding director of the Office of Community Wealth Building, served in the Jones administration, served again in the Stoney administration, and now we've brought him back as a senior policy advisor in my administration. So really pleased to have Thad's expertise and experience here. But it was a really well-run transition process. We had a lot of folks involved in that. And 5 days into the administration, we get hit with the water crisis. And so I think the way that I thought I would be spending the first month or so of the administration just went out the window because, so much of the work had to be not only in the midst of the crisis, getting water back up, communicating well, and then restoring, which, happened over the course of the first week. But then all of the sort of implications, the ripple effect of a crisis like that. And I think that has shifted the focus in ways that in some ways are good for the city, right? One of the things that'll come out of it is a real focus on shoring up infrastructure, whether that's water infrastructure, shifting our lens to gas infrastructure, thinking about other big things that we just need to know what have been the recent audits and review, and where are there places of deferred maintenance that we really need to prioritize spending. So that body of work will now be one of our after actions from this experience is setting up an infrastructure council and really focusing on some of those like core elements of what our community depends on city government to provide.
Training wheels off. It was just no time for training wheels, right? You just jumped right on in. How did you approach the water crisis early? And it was the first big thing that happened in your tenure. Like, what was your approach to that?
Thankfully, I've been in the midst of a lot of crisis, right? I mean, I think my experience both as public health director and things that people wouldn't necessarily think of, but dating back to 2011, I remember the H1N1 pandemic and then Zika virus. And so, these were things that had limited impact in the Richmond region. But, as a public health entity, we were scaling up to do emergency response, and we were doing a version of mass vaccination. And then fast forward to COVID, where we had like a true global pandemic that really impacted every corner of our city. And so much of my time leading that local response initially, and then subsequently leading the state response, was operating in the emergency response mind frame, right? Working in an emergency operations center, doing media on a regular basis, and learning how to both manage the operational response, but also the communications and the media response. And I think in a lot of ways it was good training for what I stepped into.
You've done a great job of that.
Oh, thanks.
You really have. And I've only heard positive feedback from the community as it pertains to just the grace that you kind of came in with and handled some very tough questions. And shout out to the media also.
Yeah, they were great partners in all of this, and I think kept us on our toes and made sure that we were responding to the things that the people needed to know. And I think in many ways it was a really helpful relationship. I think about one of the tenets that I learned during COVID, which is, be really clear about what you know and what you don't know.
Yeah.
And I think I came in, when I look back over the initial communications around the water crisis, one of the things I wish I could have taken back, had a do-over around was the first time that I was addressing the media, the information I was getting, and part of my personality as a pretty sunny, optimistic guy and wanting to be reassuring. I heard what I was hearing from our team, and I was like, okay, this seems like we're going to manage it. We're going to have the water up and running in a few hours. And I think, what I should have done, learning from my past experience, what I should have done is say, hey, here's what we know now. Here's what we don't know, and we'll just keep you posted on a regular basis. Because if there was any misstep in the communications, it was probably being overly optimistic at the front end, and then when it was clear we weren't going to get water restored that day, having to shift gears, but really
that's fair.
Dealing with the disappointment and frustration of a community.
That's fair. I mean, I think what I heard is that, yes, to your point, but I don't even know if it was so much the context of what you said as much as there were people that, I mean, you convey messages very positive, and I think some people in pain,
Yeah, sure.
And you're in the toughest position in the city. You're supposed to be a leader and lead with being optimistic and positive and enthusiastic and energy. And I think I'm reading through the comments more or less. I was seeing people kind of respond like, man, we're hurt. He sounds so positive. I think it's tough. Like, what does the city expect though? If you was being negative or talking down or dull, people would talk about you as well. It's like you're in a position where people are going to talk about you regardless of what you do. Yeah. And you've done a phenomenal
It comes with the territory. And
when you sit at home and you're talking to your wife and your family, what areas of growth in yourself personally have you seen already since she was out on the campaign trail?
Yeah. I mean, certainly the knowledge of the city infrastructure, right? Like, there's a lot of things that I think all of us as candidates would hear from the community, like, yeah, we've got a solution for that. Yeah, we can fix that. And then you get into the work and you realize, man, there are layers of not just organizational bureaucracy, but also like political complexity of different factions of our community who actually want different things, see different solutions that make sense. And then, just learning how to operate in the dynamic with city council and with an organization. I've learned a lot in the first month.
Yeah. We're gonna talk about housing a little bit. And when we're done here, remember I shared with you about a housing program over on the north side of Richmond. I don't think you guys ever connected.
No, we haven't.
I'm going to connect you because they're in the process of doing another expansion.
Okay, we did share a few texts back and forth, but just never.
Yeah, there's some great things happening over there that I want you to be tapped in on. I recently heard you speak at the what was the name of that event? It was at the Virginia Museum. A lot of speaking events.
The State of Affordable Housing.
Yeah. And I thought that was a great event. I'm really a big fan of Javon Burton.
Yeah,
he does a really great job. With the significant rise in home prices, what specific strategies are being implemented right now to increase affordable housing?
Yeah, I think there are a number of things that kind of came in at the tail end of Mayor Stoney's time here, which are definitely pushing us in the right direction, right? There's some affordable housing performance grants that are starting to roll out now that will provide the right incentives for developers to come in and produce housing that can actually be affordable at anywhere from 30 to 80% of the area median income. So I think programs like that are the absolute right thing. We are also looking at, another great thing that Mayor Stoney's administration did was really go after money through a bond issuance to really infuse the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. And so we're still kind of working through that process, but it should create a pathway for regular inputs into the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, which is something that we need long term, right? We need to make sure that there is a dedicated stream of funding to affordable housing. And so this is one option to do that. I think the other thing that we really have to lean into and really have to understand is that producing housing across the board is just going to be good for everybody. I was recently with some experts at the Pew Charitable Trust and with mayors all over the country, because this housing crisis is not a Richmond-specific issue, right? Every city and suburban area across the country is struggling with the same thing. And so Pew has done a lot of really thoughtful evidence, developed a really thoughtful evidence base and data gathering around this. And what they've seen is that the cities that have been most effective at producing more housing stock have done two things. They've kept rental rates relatively stable, but they have also minimized the displacement of low-income residents and people of color. And that's such a huge priority to us.
Say that last part one more time.
So that when you produce more housing, it does two things. It minimizes the increase in rental. I mean, they've seen 2-3% increases, but when you look over the last 20 years, we've seen 30% increases in average rental rates across the country. So it minimizes the increase in rental rates, but it also reduces the displacement of low income and people of color from communities. And that's what we are after here in Richmond. We want to minimize the increase of rental rates, and we want to make sure that we are supporting rich, diverse, inclusive communities.
I was riding, what I guess that's, the Boys and Girls Club on the East End. There's a project area over there that's just being redeveloped now.
Richmond Renaissance, by Old Armstrong.
What is that? Is that affordable housing?
Yeah, well, it's a mix. It's a mixed income development, and this has been 8 years probably in the making. And I was public health director, but very involved because we were running clinics in public housing. We had a lot of residents, and we actually housed the first housing advocate program in Richmond in RHA communities. And so the health department was actually very involved because housing and health are so interconnected.
It looks really good.
Yeah, so that project was the design was that we would do a phased move of residents of Creighton Court across the street, across 9 Mile Road, into this Old Armstrong community. And the design of that Old Armstrong community was originally intended to be a third public housing voucher, so residents of Creighton who would move over with a voucher and live in new housing. A third senior housing, and so again, low-income seniors who would come from public housing, and then a third market rate.
Is that 55 and older?
Senior housing is 55 and over, and then a third market rate, which is just open and selling.
Anybody.
To anybody.
That's great.
And so I think it's those kinds of concepts of mixed income community that we really need to expand and invest more in, because, I think one of the big challenges our city has faced has been the deep concentration of poverty and then subsequently the disinvestment in those communities. When you think about Creighton, Fairfield, Wickham, and Mosby, all just contiguous communities, and then you think about the last 70 years of public housing, existing in that geographic area, and then a city that has chosen not to invest in either services or other amenities, that has had a huge impact on the population.
What are they going to do with the rest of Creighton? The old design.
Yeah. So the the plan is that, and as you see happening on 9 Mile Road, is the rebuilding of the parts of Creighton Court that they tore down, and they're doing it with the same intentionality, right? It'll be partly public housing voucher, partly senior housing, and then partly market rate housing. Okay. And I think the idea, and now it's been a few years since I've been really intimately involved with this, and so I actually have a meeting coming up very soon with the Richmond Redevelopment and Housing Authority's CEO, Stephen Nesmith, and his team. But, to better understand what is the phased approach, because, we've been talking about public housing redevelopment for 2 decades in this city. Yeah. And frankly, the way that the federal government is going, and this is important because the federal government is the one who funds public housing, right? Yeah. And so they are not reinvesting in public housing. They are not giving money to build more public housing. They're really moving almost entirely to vouchers, which means that we, not just the city, not just RRHA, but really our entire region has to build the housing stock so that when people transition to vouchers, they actually have a place to go. And so I think this is the thoughtfulness that we need to have as a city and as a region to make sure that our residents of public housing can be safely and stably housed.
Appreciate that information. I have a lot more to learn on that, but it looks great. Yeah. It looks great.
Yeah, I think it's the model of the kind of things that we want to see happening all over the region.
Transforming City Hall and governance was a big part of your, you ran on that.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so talk to us a little bit about how that's going right now.
Yeah, I mean, it still is going to be,
It's only been a few days.
That's right. I get it. but top priority for me now, but really, this kind of work takes years, right? The work of making sure that you've got the right leadership team, making sure that you've got the right policies and procedures in place. I talked often on the campaign about the reality that so much of the frustration that frontline employees experience, and subsequently, the lack of maybe service delivery that residents of our city experience has to be poured into and invested in by mid-level supervisors and managers. And so, I think one of the things that big organizations, especially governmental organizations, don't do well is really invest in training, development, building the skill set of actually supervising and managing people effectively. And so, this is tough because this is going to be a challenging budget season for us. We've seen just the ongoing increase in healthcare costs, and so there's money that needs to go there. One of the really good things our city has done has been to engage in collective bargaining, and so that has lifted the annual salaries of really low paid frontline employees, which is important if we want to retain and recruit a really good workforce. But it's also expensive, and so what we're going to see as we head into this budget season is really figuring out how do we honor collective bargaining agreements? How do we make sure that we're paying our employees what we need to be competitive? But then it's likely going to mean a step back in other things that we've invested in over time. And so that's and the process of really building good and efficient government is going to be a combination of investing in our people, of investing in IT systems, right? Because something that we have not spent a lot of money on in recent years is actually building out technology, right? And the world has moved in ways that our local government hasn't. And people expect that, and so it's going to mean that we're investing money in different places. But this isn't quick work. I mean, this is work that happens over time. But that's some of the lens I'm bringing to this first budget,
particularly with a young, growing workforce. That's one thing that. I don't know if he even had time, but usually when every year the mayor will talk about the budget. The budget was prepared for you?
No, a lot of the work was done, kind of the initial phase was done before I got here, but I will introduce the budget on March 26th or 27th, at the end of March. And so, we've had a compressed period of time that was compressed even more by the water crisis, but this is top priority for us now is really figuring out how do we put together a budget that I'll present to City Council at the end of March, and then City Council will have about a month to kind of go back and forth, and we will hopefully work together to get to a balanced budget that we adopt in April at some point.
Got you. Okay. Curious, recently we had the passing of Jimmy Carter, and it was the first time in a long time. You very seldomly ever see like a lot of former president or presidents come together. I'm curious as it pertains to just mayors. Like, I don't know if we want to call it the mayor fraternity of the city, but and we also just had the passing of Henry Marsh, Richmond's first black mayor. Yeah. I'm curious, like, has there, being a new mayor in the city, has there been any like camaraderie, fellowship between you and Dwight Jones, Stoney, the former mayors? Has there been any like collectives getting together and talking to kind of help you in this experience?
Well, I'll tell you, at Henry Marsh's funeral, which was just this past weekend, just an incredibly inspiring time and a beautiful ceremony for an incredibly inspiring man. There were 5 of us, 5 former mayors of the city together, me, Mayor Stoney, Mayor Jones, Tim Kaine, Senator Kaine, and Mayor Rudy McCollum. And so it was great to just be in each other's space. I will say Mayor Stoney and I have certainly stayed in contact. We worked together really closely when I was his public health director. And so he has continued to send notes of encouragement, provide advice along the way. Mayor Jones and I have had a couple of opportunities to speak, and he'll be somebody that I make sure I spend time with in the coming months. And then there is certainly a network of mayors around the country that's organized through something called the U.S. Conference of Mayors. And so, I'm on a signal thread with a number of mayors that provide advice, share experiences, particularly right now as many of us are managing the impacts of a federal government that is making decisions that really are impacting our community. There's a group of there's a group of mayors around the country that I will lean on and say, hey, what are you seeing in your community, or how have you thought about this?
You've had to work as a part of Youngkin's administration in the past. Based on your history and relationship, I mean, it's been very public in the past. Stoney from time to time would go at him.
Yeah,
what I'm saying? He'd you guys maybe due to having a different working relationship, do you think there's areas where you can help manage and lead the city by crossing the aisle and working collaboratively with Youngkin and his administration to benefit the city? Because there's a lot of things coming down from the White House that are carrying over, like you said, into our local community.
I suspect that in many of those things, the city and the state are going to be on different pages. Yeah. I think in all of this work, there's a real importance of doing across the aisle work, because we're really dependent on the state for a significant amount of funding. You think about what we need to invest in schools and teacher salaries, what we need to invest in aging infrastructure, whether it's our water infrastructure or old school buildings or bridges. Like, we need the state government. And so no matter who's in office there, building bipartisan support so that as we move forward and need probably another $400 million for our combined stormwater overflow system over the next 7 or 8 years, I'm going to need R's and D's to understand the impact of that. And so I think certainly having spent time in both the Northam and the Youngkin administration allowed me to build relationships across the aisle and to be seen as somebody who is reasonable, who's willing to engage in developing solutions and is willing to work with both sides. And I think that will only benefit our city moving forward.
We're gonna wrap up here. First and foremost, though, thank you so much for taking the time to allow us to come in.
Absolutely,
with our listeners. Definitely appreciate it. You kept your word. You told us you'd be back.
I told you I'd come back.
Told us you'd be back. So, and definitely, we want to continue to stay connected with you over the next 4 years. Just as we close, I want to hear a little bit about like what it's been like working with the city from a public safety standpoint with the police department. I know that was another area that you put a lot of focus on in your campaign. So like, how is that relationship got going?
I have been nothing but impressed by all elements of our public safety, our police force, our fire department, our emergency communications. Probably the thing that gets the most publicity is our police department. And I've just been really impressed with Chief Edwards' commitment to transparency, the way he uses data to inform police practices, and his willingness to hear new ideas, to think about new directions. obviously gun violence has been a big focus, certainly during the campaign, but really even more broadly than that. And Richmond has a hard history there, right? I mean, 25, I guess almost 30 years ago now, we were the murder capital of the country, right? Number one murders per capita.
Yep.
And I will say that, what we have seen since then has been a progressive march towards a safer community. I mean, last year we had just above 60 homicides. And so I think the work that the RPD is doing, both to be on the ground, to do community policing, to build relations, but also to use data, to use social media, to use technology, has really resulted in improved outcomes.
Yeah.
Now, there's still a perception, I think, for a lot of folks, especially when you walk up and down Broad Street and there's, sort of smaller petty crimes, that we've got some more work to do. And I think part of that will be building back up the confidence in the police force, because, kind of after 2020, we went from a sworn officer number about 720, dropped all the way down to low 500s, right? We had a huge vacancy rate in our police force because it was just really difficult to be a police officer. And I think as things have settled in, as we've changed policing practices, as the police chief has really driven a new philosophy about the way that we are going to be connected to and engaged with communities, that's brought people back. And so we're marching in the right direction. There's still some work to do to build capacity while making sure that we are policing in the right way, that we're really thoughtful about unconscious bias, that we're using technology smartly, and that we're ultimately supporting both the police who have to do these jobs and supporting the community that deserves to have interactions with law enforcement in a way that's dignifying.
Yeah. I love when I see police out on bicycles in the community, and just the human side. I think I've been very impressed with our Edwards is correct. I've been Chief Edwards as well. Actually sent him an American Family recently, and he spoke at a conference I was at with all the Bar Association conference. So I think it's never been a more difficult time than to be in law enforcement, and so I take my hat off to those folks, and we definitely appreciate their ability to keep our city safe. Managing risk is keeping the community safe.
Yeah,
so
that's right.
It's been a pleasure to have you on. Thank you so much. We really appreciate you. We appreciate your team here. Everybody's been very pleasant from the door, walking in the door, very professional.
So glad to hear it. Thank you, Randy.
Yes, and this has been another episode of the Randy Wilson Podcast with our mayor here in the city of Richmond, Dr. Danny Avula. We appreciate having you on, and we'll talk to him again sometime in the near future.
Look forward to it.
Thanks
a lot.
Yep.